we have to acknowledge the patient's ability for autonomy, to rule for himself. That patient that says, I want a bloodless operation. That patient that says, stop the morphine, stop the chemotherapy, stop the radiotherapy, I do not want any treatment. That woman with the 2 small children who has breast cancer in an advanced development already, that says, I do not want any treatment. Let the disease go its ways. Let it follow its the pathological course way. And you know for a fact, the patient is going to die. She has 2 small children. Can you see how you know of better that do no harm? You think of this person in her family community. She's part of a family. They have 2 small children. If you're not going to do chemotherapy or at least radiotherapy for that mama carcinoma, that patient is going to die within a year, leaving behind 2 small children. But if the patient wants to rule for herself and say autonomously, I don't want any treatment, we cannot force the patient to do that. I had the other day a student phoned me from one of the wards saying that they're sitting with a sister, what should we do now, because the sister are also on within. This patient he's in severe kidney failure because of nephritis, and the patient needs to relieve the pressure on his kidneys. He needs urgently dialysis to relieve. And this patient's mother died while on dialysis. So can you see the connection that he made? It's not, in any case, it's not worthwhile. And the doctors were arguing with the patient. They got the priest in, they got the family, and the patient just said, I know it's not going to work. I'm not going to expose my body to all of this. And he has a wife at home who's also breast cancer, but in an advanced development of breast cancer. I honestly didn't know what to tell this child, because she said, sister, he can still be better, although sick, to support his wife. She needs him. He just felt, leave me. And he was already so oedematous, he was swollen up, and the sarxus oedema, severe oedema, because of his kidneys that are not functioning properly. He just refused, point blank, to receive dialysis. And the patient ultimately died. In 3-4 days, the patient wasn't there anymore. And this had a very big impact on my student. It was so bad that I had to refer to employment assistance because she couldn't take it, and the best of 2 evils. And the patient made the choice, autonomy rules. Yeah, he had to write down and say, I refuse to blah, 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 blah. But at the end of the day, he had the right to rule for himself. We had the situation a year or so ago where a woman came in with breast cancer, where she had herbs and it smelled like methylated spirits, swabs stuffed into the breast, where the tumor actually, it started to become septic, and it opened up and there was a draining wound. And when she came to the hospital, she was on the last. It was so offensive. And what was the purpose? She went to a traditional healer. Can we say to her, how could you? No, it's her belief system. It's her belief system. We had the situation with a little girl that the father didn't want to leave this child's bedside because he was adamant that she's not going to receive antibiotics, that they use this, not sulfonamides, what do you call, silver, nano silver, the silver pellets that you get in the shop. They say it's a natural antibiotics, and that she was just there for the drip, and the child had pneumonia. In the end, the social workers had to come in and the medical superintendent to overrule. But it was a big, big hoo-ha, autonomy to rule for yourself. And you see, it poses such a big turmoil within the professional. Because how can I do the wrong thing knowing that it's wrong when I know of better? Then beneficence is the second dimension, which means to do good or to do no harm. Have you ever heard of this terminology? Beneficence?
there in our books.
Yeah, it's in your books, yeah. In your training, somewhere you must have encountered this word. But beneficence means the do no harm principle, that whenever we work with patients or caring for people, nurses should always do what is in the best interest of the patient. I don't need to explain that any further. Who has any questions on it? Right? Then justice. Let me just pause here and go back to beneficence. I wonder, who's the registered nurses here? Okay. I want to ask you, if you are confronted in a situation, say you work in a rural hospital, where the doctors there's one doctor on the town, and he's about 30 kilometers to 40 kilometers in the Karoo. And you are in the hospital, and you have a person who has a bilateral pneumothorax. And the patient's saturation, oxygen saturation, is 89% or 85%. But previously, you work in a big academic setting, or you work in the military, in the war zone, where you were used to putting in underwater chest drains. What will you do? The doctor tells you from there far, Sissy, put the patient on 40% oxygen so long until I come. And you see the patient is going down, the sats is dropping. To do good or to do no harm? What will you do? And ultimately the patient is going to stop breathing. In any case, then he needs to be intubated. And that was part of your emergency work on the war zone. What will you do?
In that scenario, I can't make a decision because I'm not proficient and skilled in that area. But if it should be in a situation where I feel I'm competent to do something skilled,
yes,
I would do the skill thing if I know I'm going to succeed.
Excellent. Who says so? Who says you can work out of your scope of practice? Because that's a doctor's work.
That is where the ethical dilemma and decision comes in.
I don't want that answer. I don't want that one. Legally, who says so? Who says that if you are skilled, or what tells you, if you're skilled enough to do something for the do no harm and to do good, and you do it well, and then you save the patient's life, what tells you or what covers you? Because it's not in our scope, it's not Article 38A in the Nursing Act either.
It's my own confidence and my own risk.
She says it's a confidence and a risk. That is a risk to risk like that.
But it always comes back to want you.
I want you to think, people, ethos and professional practice. I want you to think legally.
But you're giving us a lecture on ethics.
No, I don't want that also. Have you ever heard of the Regulation 387, the acts and omissions? Huh? You know what? We sometimes work and we forget. Because that tells you, in one of the articles there, in the subsections tells you, that it boils down to as long as you do good to the patient, it is okay to work out of the scope of another professional for what you're not qualified to, as long as nothing goes wrong with the patient. It's an act to do good. The moment something goes wrong with the patient, it's an omission. And then you are going to be at fault, big problems. And that is there's a hairline in our scope. Sorry that I exclude the sisters now. But there's a big conflict of interest in the registered nurse's scope, because you are trained on a higher cognitive level with pathology, microbiology, physiology, anatomy, all the core fundamentals which allows you to make a decision and a nursing diagnosis based on what you see there and what you see. It happened to me time and again, people. I had to give anesthetics in Kafinia, in my hometown where I'm coming from, because there was only one doctor in the town. Because the other sister on duty stood with her fingers in the patient's vagina, stuck around umbilical prolapse of a umbilical cord. Yeah. And she couldn't help the doctor. And lo and behold, the assistant nurse took the table for the operation. So that was the scenario there. Yes, the doctor prepared all the anesthetic drugs, but he was in such a state, he intubated the patient, but I had to sustain that intubation, maintain it, and I had to administer the anesthetic drugs. I had a big problem with it because I was a young sister. I was about 3-4 years as a registered person. And this is what happened to me. And I interacted with SANC. And that is the answer that I got. Did something wrong happen to the patient? Are you able to perform skillful intubation of a patient? Yes. Where did you work before? In the research unit. It was part of my day-to-day thing. Sometimes I had to do it. I was trained to do it safely. So did anything happen to the patient? No. Then it's okay. It was a good act. The moment something goes wrong, the patient had an anesthetic there, I would have probably gone to jail because then it becomes an omission. It's not unfair. You see, that is why the sisters are so up, check, up.
We're trying to help the patient.
Yes.
If it's a good outcome,
But
then it's good. But if something goes wrong, then...
But what is your scope of practice? That is the doctor's scope of practice. But as a registered nurse, it puts you... Okay, here's another one. You stand on Cape Town station or Bellville station coming from a shift. And you're tired, you work the whole night, you stand. And the next moment, but you have your uniform on. And the next moment, somebody screams, "Nurse! Help! Patient is going to give birth." Who of you have been in a situation like that? Are you a accoucheur? Yeah, but then you have to be able to perform that. I'm talking about our enrolled staff now. Who of you have been confronted with that? And then you do the delivery. Or you a registered nurse, a bridging course without midwifery, and you perform the delivery. Nothing happens to the baby and the mother's okay. But the moment that child, there was a shoulder dystocia, and you couldn't get the baby out. You took responsibility and accountability to say, I'm laying my hands on you. It poses an ethical dilemma because I know what to do because in my training I did first aid for an emergency delivery. But what if it becomes a complicated thing?
But equally, can you stand back and let that person stand
just and the baby falls and die?
Competent, you know, that's equally.
Can you see how you reason with your own morals here inside? That is an ethical dilemma. You have to make a decision based on all of this. Then there's justice as the other dimension. In other words, fairness with equal distribution of the benefits to all. This comes into consideration, especially when you, let's take you to the community. Resources is a thing that is limited in South Africa, in the government sector. Yes, one patient that has a severe oozing wound. But there are other patients that come in alternative days for their wounds, but this patient has a severe oozing wound needing lots of dressings every day. And it's been used up by this patient so that when the other patients come, they cannot get a proper dressing. Justice means equal distribution of the benefits for all. Justice can also mean that whenever it's doing a thing in a situation, and then the next time it happens, then you stand back and say, no, I'm not going to do it. And that is where the thing where we say we're creating a precedent. When we work out of our scope of practice, then it's injustice to the patient. If you can do something. I think also our, like for example, if we know about someone who needs ARVs, you know about the ARV clinics in the government sector? Okay, ARVs. That if one person is entitled to the drugs and the treatment, the next person should also be, it should be available to that person. Another thing was, my daughter is a final year opera student. She's very gifted. She's at UCT. She developed TB last year of just below her vocal cords in the trachea. Nothing in the lungs, just below the vocal cords. We have a medical aid. She was diagnosed by means of a biopsy after a bronchoscopy. Then I reasoned for myself, but look here, the government gives free TB treatment. Why must I pay like 800-900 rand a month and milk my medical aid? Then my child can also go and go stand in the line for that, because it's a free service. It's a communicable disease that, and she got a drugs there. It's justice, it's a distribution, equality amongst everyone for everyone, right? But we cannot withhold certain treatment from a patient, saying that it's only for this specific group and not for that. Sometimes this happens, I know in the government sector with the dialysis. If you need dialysis, the machine-operated dialysis, not peritoneal, then there's a committee who sits to determine, are you eligible for dialysis? You know about that? And that poses also a big ethical dilemma for the nurse, because she's not the only one deciding that or carrying out a prescription for a patient. And then we can reason, yeah, but it's there, it should be justice. My approach should be that everyone should be able to get it, but there's a committee sitting, and they have their criteria. Or a patient who is, you know, we nurses call the patients bekwam. When somebody asks a lot of questions, and we say the patient is bekwam, then we say, if you want such care, why don't you go to a private institution? But actually, the patient is keeping us on our toes, which is the ethical dilemma for us. And we should not react like that, because we must treat everyone and approach the dilemma with a dimension of justice. There should be equal distribution of all the benefits for everyone who is a patient. Okay? Can you see I put the respect for persons on a scale, and the beneficence and justice especially must balance each other out. Okay.